Hello, team, and welcome to today's episode of the Ladies' Best Life podcast. I have an absolutely sensational guest here on the show today who I met through Instagram, one of those things where you just end up connecting with somebody, and we got chatting, we got speaking about both of our businesses, and lo and behold, this is where we are. So, Anthony, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and all the wonderful things that you do. Welcome on board.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Appreciate you having me here. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Daulphin. I'm the CEO, the founder of the Standing Ovation Project. I'm also the founder, fashion designer for the Anthony Daulphin luxury global brand, which focuses on unisex clothing. And it's all about dreaming big and going for what you want. So thanks for having me.
Very welcome. You've also done a TEDx talk, haven't you?
I have done a TEDx, yeah. Now, if you're telling me to ask to tell you when it was, that's another thing because I feel like after COVID, everything's a blur. I don't know about you, but it was a month before COVID got announced. I believe it was February 2019.
Nice.
And I had just done a talk in Paris, which was absolutely phenomenal. Getting invited to go out there and do a keynote speech on creativity, and then on returning to the UK, I had a TEDx talk, my first ever in Birmingham Royal Conservatoire, to an audience of probably about 360, I think that was in total. Yeah, it was pretty big talk. But yeah, that the title of my talk was A Leap of Faith. What if I fall? Oh, but what if you fly? So yeah, it was great experience, one that I'll never forget.
Hellish talk. I remember that was one of the first things that you sent me, and I was like, wow, this guy's got some serious wisdom. I love it. And it's definitely what I feel like I connect with is people who I can have like a proper conversation with, who will talk about stuff.
Substance.
Proper depth.
Yeah.
You, from what I can see, you are passionate about building people up. You're passionate about, especially the younger generation. You want them to learn to believe in themselves. You want them to tap into their potential in life. So, one, is that correct? And two, if so, how did you get to that?
Yeah, you're definitely right. For me, I think the what would I say now? The morals around my organization definitely lie around that quality of empathy. I think if you've got that quality of empathy, you've naturally got this instinct to want to help people to be better in themselves. And doing that, I find that I get a lot of satisfaction from it as well. So yeah, I mean, the care side probably comes from my mum. She was a full-time nurse. She's now retired. She raised me, my three brothers. Growing up in an area called Northfield in Birmingham, which is very much known as a quite a deprived area. There's not much opportunity there. So it wasn't like, we had lots of people around us to see success. It was just, we only had our mum there. She was on the grind. She was back and forth working to put food on the table. We didn't have cable TV for a while. That was a unknown thing to us. It was channels 1 to 5, and that was pretty much it. But something, having those little, things that help you to see the simplicity of life really did help me. There weren't fancy meals, there wasn't silver spoons. I remember it would be, one of our fancy meals would be corned beef and rice. Yeah. So they'll call that the poor food, but for a lot of Caribbean people, we grew up on corned beef and rice, which is actually, we love corned beef. We don't see it as poor food. For us, that was like a bit of a luxury. So, growing up now, you just look back on those things. But definitely because of my mum's career, I think, it's the care industry, it's the NHS. So you can't help but notice that your parent is actually going back and forth to work to help people. She was a midwife for a number of years. She delivered a number of babies. And I remember she brought home a newspaper clipping of her and a young mum who she just delivered the baby for. And, I can't quite remember the story. When I'm actually going to Birmingham later, so I'm going to ask her to dig through her photo album and find it for me. But the value in seeing that especially for me personally as a black person as well, growing up in the UK, it's very inspiring. As a young person, I don't think you truly understand how amazing it is until you start to get older. You know, I'm 32 now, soon 33, but now I'm at this age, I can really look back and say, wow, there was so much value and it taught me lots of different things. So yeah, working with young people has come from my mum, also having a lot of children within my family who've also, you know, just been drawn to me as their uncle or their cousin. And yeah, so for me, that I just knew that was what I wanted to do. But I started in the fashion industry. Loved working in Selfridges at the age of 17 for 4 years. Got to meet a lot of famous people and take them around the shop and find them outfits. Yeah, I remember Alan Carr walking in one. This was before Chatty Man, this was before everything. But I remember Alan Carr walking in to the store, and my manager had asked me to assist him in finding some clothes. And you know, such a funny guy naturally, but again, those little bits of experiences you now look back on and you think, well, what can I take from that?
Mm.
Well, you know what? You got to meet a high profile person. You stayed yourself. You didn't put on an act. You just stayed true and real to who you are. So those are the messages I would send to people. Whatever journey you're on, be yourself. Don't
Love
change.
it.
Don't conform to the system.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, so many things I want to touch upon. Firstly, we've got similarities in regards to parents. So
Mm,
my mum was also, she was a carer. So I always
okay.
remember going out and such a nurturing, like I always remember thinking, how does someone have so much patience? Like 4 children, single mum with me, and
Yeah.
and like just monitoring her was always like mind blowing. So that's
Mm,
very interesting that we're similar there. Did you know, you said about the empathy side of things? Do you ever remember feeling almost like, so I'll give you some context. I remember like
hmm
if I saw like an old man or woman struggling, I wouldn't just look at them and like think, oh my God, I want to help them and make it practical. I would almost like feel it deep to my core of how
mm.
sad I felt for them. Were you ever,
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
ever have that?
Yeah, probably not the same way that you did, but I have it from another angle where if I'm in a room with people, you know, there'll be a few people that I'm talking to. However, there might be one or two just on that outer circle who are in the conversation, but they're not quite in it. But you could almost see that they would like to be. I was always the person to actually call them in and say, "Oh, do you know, like, you know, so where are you from again? And you know, what is it you do?" So I always had that empathetic side where I like to get people involved if I felt that they felt a bit secluded. I've always been
Mm,
an includer, I suppose you could call it. Yeah,
yeah. It's
definitely.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because like, you know, as we were talking before, like sometimes people can look in and see the
Mm.
rooms that we spend our time in, the way that we live our lives, and think, oh, it's all right for
Yeah,
you. You know, you're now running a business that does this and da 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 da. But
that's
actually,
right.
if you zoom out and look at childhood, it hasn't, like you said, it's not a silver spoon. It's not something that's been gifted. And there is a huge
Yeah,
correlation that I've noticed as I've been listening to more and more successful people and trying to understand, you know, because success leaves clues, right? And I want to
that's
understand
right.
success for me is not about an amount, like an amount in my bank account. It's about a feeling of
Abs-
freedom, a feeling of like
yeah,
you just said about like living life authentically. So
yeah,
there seems to be a correlation, like even if we look at someone like Stephen Bartlett, who I'm an absolute diehard raving fan, like
yeah. Big up Diary of the CEO.
oh
Amazing.
man,
Yeah.
he came from a really tricky upbringing as well. And it's, what do you think about that? So do you think there's a correlation between people who've had to go through the adversity, who then have another little bit of their personality, maybe the desire to help, or maybe the desire to never settle and they always want to achieve more? Like, do you think there is a, I've got a pot here and I'm like, right, Anthony, give me the recipe for success. What do you think goes
Mm.
into that?
That's really interesting you've asked that question because part of my talks that I do, I just done a conference in Sidcup in front of about 100 educators across the mid UK. And the question I asked them was, what is your recipe for a good day?
Okay.
Because I strongly believe in how you start your day is key. But going back to your question, it's very difficult for let's say, a privileged person to be able to sit in a school or in front of another person who has had an absolutely atrocious background. Their upbringing was unstable. And it could be very difficult for a privileged person to be able to sit with that person and be able to tell them the possibilities of where they could go. Whereas another person who's been through, not so great background and upbringing could sit with that person again. And this person may have made a success of themselves. Okay. But if I personally feel it's much easier to be able to sit with that person then to really tell them because you personally understand their struggle. So for me, I think, was it a recipe for success? Is that what you asked?
What would you say is in a recipe for success, or what was in your recipe?
In a recipe for success, I'd have to say it starts with self-belief.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that goes back to that whole thing. How can you sell something if you don't believe in it yourself? And I think if on a starting point, you always have to have. It doesn't need to be a huge amount, but you need to have an ounce of self-belief because if you can latch onto that, that will slowly grow the more that you latch onto it throughout the process. But I think self-belief. I also believe open-minded and unafraid. Unafraid meaning not afraid to ask for help or to ask questions. Because for me on my journey, I've had to speak to a number of what I would call inspirational mentors. Those who I still hold close to me today. I'm sure you as well, Sasha, have got people who you've just got in your phone book who you just can call at any time. So I think being unafraid to ask questions and say, what does this mean, or how do I actually get from here to here? I also believe you need resilience because there will be people who are there to put you off the idea that you have. And I think one of the biggest barriers for me actually was people and their opinions, and focusing too much on other people's opinions on what they think of what I want to do. Actually, now I couldn't give two hoots about other people's opinions when it comes to what I'm doing, apart from those close to me, of course. So I think, yeah, looking at that key barrier, people can sometimes be a big holdback for what you want to go for. So resilience is definitely one. I'd say one of the most important ones for me is tapping into your personality on a regular basis. So I go by this. Everybody's got their own pot of treasure. Okay, we've all got our own individual pot of treasure. And if I was to ask you what's in your pot of treasure, I'm pretty sure that you could tell me what's in it. Why do I know that? Because from what I see through social media, speaking to you, I can tell you the type of person that regularly looks at yourself each day, every week. You self-analyze. You might critique yourself and say, I could be better at this. I need to work harder at that. Whereas most people nowadays, life's so fast and nobody really takes the time to actually stop and look at their own pot of treasure. And we actually could be guilty of this, myself and you, because we've just spoke about being that kind of person who always cares about other people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're that kind of person who always cares about other people, you often forget about yourself. So it's very important for everybody, for anyone who's listening, your individual pot of treasure. Most people that I ask kids and I also ask adults. And everybody says, I don't really see much in here. And I say, look again, because in everybody's pot of treasure, you've got an abundance of qualities, your strengths, your talents, your skill sets, whatever it is. But it's really important that you look in there so you can remind yourself of them, so that then you can then apply them into your daily life. So yeah, biggest recipe for success, I would say, is looking into your pot of treasure. I'm going to stick with that one. That's my favorite, to be honest. Yeah.
I love that. And we're quite in society, you're not really encouraged to look in your pot of treasure. You're more encouraged to look in the mirror and look for faults. I
Yeah.
think I don't know where that comes from, but definitely is something that I've had to work on a lot throughout my life, is like figuring out it's okay to celebrate yourself. Now, you mentioned
Would you say that? Would you say that's down to a lot of self-confidence, though, or lack of confidence, should I say?
I think it's more conditioning. So
Okay.
so one of the things that I heard people say as I was growing up a lot was don't get too big for your boots, don't
Yeah.
forget your roots, and also like people being full of themselves, like, oh, she's so full of herself. And
Mm.
these are little things that you could maybe only hear once, right? But depending on
Yeah.
where you're at in life, and maybe you're a child and you hear your mum say it, or could be anything, even a teacher, for some reason we pick up on certain sentences, and they were
Yeah.
what I picked up on. I think for me, because my dad left when I was 4, so I always had the narrative, which looking back
Mm.
now is crazy, but as a 4-year-old I internalized it as I'm broken, that's why he left. So
Okay.
that was a narrative that carried on throughout my whole life until literally the last couple of years, and that's a conditioned belief that I've had to work on.
That's very interesting you say that, because my dad left a similar age, right? For you, that was your kind of conclusion. For me, for me, it was like he's no good.
Mm,
I'm, I'm gonna now prove you wrong and
mm.
show you who I can be. That was kind of more. I can't say that was my mindset maybe from a child, but I don't remember having the same conclusion that you did. But yeah, it's interesting.
I had the same belief, okay,
Mm.
until I started therapy, like properly wanting to explore Sasha Holly by 2 years ago. I was always like, oh, he's a dickhead.
Okay.
Like he left something that was really good, like me and my mum are ace, da 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 da. And then it wasn't
Yeah.
until we started like really digging into it and get into the like, the real core of it all, that I realized that
Yeah.
actually that 4-year-old Sash was broken from it. So
Okay.
but it's
It's interesting that.
it is so interesting. Now, have you heard of there was a study done, right, with a rat, or with rats, with multiple
Mm.
rats. And they basically, what they did is they had a spring on its tail to test the force of what the rat pulled at and ran towards. Okay. So, and in front of it, they put the smell of cheese. And
Okay.
they analyzed how quick the rat pulled. Okay.
Right.
Then they put the smell of a cat behind it. Okay. And what they found
Okay.
is that the rat pulled so much harder when there was a cat behind it. And what we're looking at here was motivation.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And with you saying the bit then around, I want to prove you wrong, is that your cat? Is that your away from motivation? Is that approving, like, is that proving you're away from? It just came to my mind as you were speaking, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Well, let's be honest. Most people go for something a lot harder when they've got more of a reason to.
Hmm.
If there's no reason to go for something, then you're gonna go for what you're going for, but you're gonna be probably most likely half-hearted about doing it. Whereas when you've got a reason, especially when it's a reason that really affects you, um, I do believe that you push harder than you intended on doing, just because, like you said, that so-called cat or the smell of the cat is behind you. So yeah, I do believe that when you've got a reason, yeah, you put more into it. You 100% do. Yeah.
I just find it fascinating because it's, so I work with women who generally have lost themselves. They can't seem to, for the life of them, they know what to do, but they can't implement it. And generally,
Yeah.
they'll join us super motivated. Then we get to about 8 to 12 weeks, and that's the slip off mark. And obviously,
Okay.
our job, we can anticipate it, we know it's coming. So it's our job to then dig into them more to understand why. And
Absolutely.
what we generally find is that because they had a strong away from motivator when they first joined, i.e., uncomfortable in their skin, no energy,
Yeah.
confidence is through the floor, they are wanting to run away from that. But then they get
Okay.
comfortable, they get a bit complacent, and then we have to
Complacent. Yeah.
find, either a new kind of towards motivator. So look how healthy you can be, look at what else you can achieve, or dig,
Okay.
dig for a new away from motivator.
Yeah. So you're that person then, actually assisting people to put things back in their pot of treasure.
Yes.
Basically, yeah. No, I like that. That's good. And again, it's brilliant that there's people like you out there who are assisting people with that, because I think, it's easy for me to say, right, I'm confident of what's in my pot of treasure. I know, but there are people out there with totally different circumstances, things that have happened in the past that really has crushed them. Let's be honest. So where does a person go when they are that far crushed that they don't feel like they haven't even got enough power within themselves to get to that first step? So people like yourself, and me as well, because again, that's what I do. That's a lot of the work me and my team do in schools is working with young people with their trauma that they've gone through to overcome barriers to their learning or their futures. So yeah, definitely, it's really good.
Hats off to you, because this is something that I've spoken to the coaches within my team about quite a number of times. Like, so I work with women generally in their 40s. So imagine if I've always said to them, like, imagine if we could work with girls in their like teens.
There you go.
And it be prevention rather than cure, almost,
Yeah.
or help them to live life, like, if trauma has happened younger on in their life, which generally is where it comes from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Imagine if we could help them fix that quicker. So,
well, I have to shout out my member of staff, Rosina, because Rosina is my the Stand Innovation Let Us Shine lead. The Let Us Shine program is one of the initiatives we set up within Stand Innovation. It's widely used now by schools across the UK, and it's a girls only group for a maximum of 10 girls per group, in a school setting, primary and secondary. Working with them for 10 weeks to overcome the barriers to their learning. It's all about young girls finding their identity, knowing that they can have a voice, which is so important for strong females coming up in the world, and just having ownership of who they are, and not taking no crap. So yeah, it's good.
And especially, well, at any age, I think that's powerful. But if I think back to Sasha as a teenager, I got lost down the route of drugs and partying, and it was an interesting time for sure. But
oh yeah,
imagine if I could have had someone there, that support there to go, you don't need to do this,
100%.
So that's powerful. So we've got to wrap up shortly, but I'd love you to. We've touched upon authenticity a few times.
Yeah.
Someone is listening to this and they know they're not being true to themselves. They're exhausted. They're constantly people pleasing. They feel like they've lost themselves a bit. How do they go about being authentically them?
I remember speaking to a young boy in year 10 in a secondary school in East Sussex last year. He had a very similar thing where he was what I'd call a follower, and he was the follower of people around him. He had soaked up all of their energy and wasn't using any of his own. And I remember saying to him, right now, there was a big square mat in this classroom, and I remember saying, right now you're standing in this mat, in the area of this mat here. I said, stand there for a moment. So he stood on the mat, and I said, step out onto the carpet, onto the other carpet, not the mat. So he steps out, and I said, I want you to just look in to the square now. I said, sometimes we have to take ourselves out of the circle or the square that we may be in, because when you're in it, it's very hard to see things. It's very hard to identify what's going on within yourself. So sometimes we have to literally take ourselves out of that environment so we can have the headspace to really see what's going on. So for anyone who's not been authentic to themselves or not been true to who they are, for me personally, I think it's always good to put yourself in a place where you'll be able to have some headspace and not be soaked up by everything that's going on currently. I will say again, identify what's in your pot of treasure, strip everything back, go right back to the basics around where you started. Always good to look at your roots and look at where you started. Look at how you've come up in the world as well, from a teenager to an adult or a young adult. But this applies to anybody. It doesn't matter who it is and the age. But definitely strip back and work from the beginning again, and find out where it was within your journey where you find that you started to take a left because they took a left, or you started to take a right because they took a right. And then when you've looked at those directions where you turned, figure out where you could have gone. Because apart from those left and right turns you took because that person did or so and so did, there's a place where you could have gone based off your own independent thinking. And independent thinking is key as well. Start practicing being an independent thinker again, because like you mentioned, Sasha, that word conditioned, you practice something enough, it becomes a habit, you know. Habits are the hardest thing to break out of. They're very easy to start, but they're very difficult to break out of. So, you know, you have a 10 times harder job breaking out of what you started. So I'd really say just focus from the beginning again. Look at where you came up, figure out where you could have gone, and have a think about independent thinking and what that really means. You know, because saying no is difficult. Saying no is difficult. We can be yes people all the time. And I remember in the early stages of my career as well with Stand Innovation, I was very much a yes person. Even the services that we were offering, you know, we couldn't put a price on the services that we was offering as an organization. But again, I remember selling ourselves short just because I was a yes person. Only to then sit there in a room thinking, why did I just do that?
Crazy, isn't it?
So yeah.
That's so powerful. And I love the whole, so I use the analogy of you can't see the picture if you're in the frame.
There you go then. Yeah. So
it's so true, isn't it? To take yourself out of it. And even that kind of practical, like, you know, what you did there, that practical thing of like, right, literally take yourself out and then look in, see what's going on. So that's super powerful.
Yeah.
Anthony, thank you so much for your time. We will definitely get you back in a few weeks for part 2, where we can dig in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Where can people find you if they do want to connect with you?
Well, you can find the education organisation Standing Ovation Project on Instagram. We are at Standing OVPROJ, Standing of Proj. And then the clothing fashion line you can find at Anthony with a H, DE, Daulphin, DAULPHIN. And we're also on the same handles on Twitter also. And on LinkedIn, you can find me at Anthony Daulphin. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
See you soon. Take care.
All right. Take care.